We're in the middle of a Maamar, and our discussion is about Eretz Yisrael, about Israel, about the Holy Land, based, of course, on the Parsha. Last week, Parshas Massei, we started the Maamar, and this week, with Hashem's help, of course, we're going to continue. What does the Torah tell us about Israel? Borders. In other words, what is the Torah's message when analyzing the concept of Eretz Yisrael is that it has limits. And I suppose on a philosophical level, on a spiritual level, that seems counterintuitive. It seems like the wrong thing. If Eretz Yisrael is a holy land, the Chassidishe has much discussion about what's called Eretz Torah, arguing the breadth of Israel, the expansiveness of Israel. Now, of course, geographically, Israel's a small place. Spiritually, Israel is the center of the world. It's a very holy place. But when describing the Holy Land, how would you describe it? You would presume that the Torah would find a more positive, more expansive form to communicate what Eretz Yisrael is. Yet here we have a Parsha which, admittedly, its purpose is to tell us the borders of Israel. But when Chassidus, when Kabbalah, when mysticism analyzes this analysis, this rendering of the definition of Israel, the borders of Israel, and focuses on its limitations, it raises a flag. You say, there has to be significance, there has to be meaning, there has to be something worthwhile and deeper about the fact that when you talk about the Holy Land, you refer to it as something that's defined by Veyarad Hagvul, the border, the limit, the containment. And that's what this Maamar does. This Maamar argues that if you don't put borders on Israel, you don't have an Israel. If you don't put limitations on holiness, holiness does not exist. Now, this, of course, means not that if you don't put limitations on holiness, holiness does not exist. This means if you don't put limitations on holiness, holiness remains a non-thing. It remains formless, it remains transcendent, it remains evasive, unavailable, not real, not material, and not manifest. Yiddishkeit is about a reality, a world. If you have no world, you have no Yiddishkeit, you have no purpose. If Yiddishkeit is about a reality, the limitations are not only in the reality, the limitations have to correspondingly be in Yiddishkeit. And that's the meaning, that's the significance, that's the profundity behind the biblical description of the Holy Land as being bordered in, locked in, Veyarad Hagvul. The limitations are meant to indicate and to communicate that it's because Eretz Yisrael, in His holiness, has limitations, that the holiness is real. And that's the point. The point is that there is a world where holiness is manifest. And the center of that world is Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land. And it's only because of its limitations that this is all real. And this is what we talked about last week. If you will, it's the celebration of borders, of limitations. Because if something has no limitations and has no borders, it has no reality. It's God. It has no definition. And the language of last week's class included, at least in part, this expression, Yud Beis Gevuli Alachsen. The idea of borders having relationships. It's not just one wall, but a variety of walls interacting with one another. And that's really what creates the space and creates the limitation of space. It's almost if you were to say that these two statements are synonyms. To have space, you have to have dimensions. And to have space, the dimensions have to have ends. If it expands indefinitely, it cannot exist, because there's a relationship between one dimension and the other dimension, one extreme and the opposite extreme. Because only in its limitation is there a relationship between one dimension and another, and only in the relationship between one dimension and another is the space created within that framework, within those limitations. Now, to be very blunt, I'm not sure what I just said is entirely logically true, but at least to me it seems that this, in part, is what the Maamar is trying to communicate. So we're going to continue. We're going to delve further into the Maamar and explore the significance and the meaning of Veyarad Hagvul, the manifestation of limit. And just to recapitulate, we discussed last week Veyarad Hagvul HaYardeino and Veyarad Hagvul Yam Kineret. The limit will affect the Jordan, the river Jordan, which was interpreted last week in the first version of the Maimed, the more abbreviated version of the Maimed, as being an idea of birur, of taking from one property and transferring to another property based on the Mishnah Masechta in the Chazal Masechta Baba Metzia, which we touched on in the last class. And of course, the Yam Kineret, the river Kineret, represents a pure godliness because it has to do with Kinir Havaya, with so to speak godliness. So the two concepts of limitation were the need to put limits on the way Kedusha takes from Klippa, because otherwise Kedusha could not take from Klippa in a healthy, in a constructive way, and then the limitation of Kedusha itself. Tonight's class, we will delve into this, and we will actually expand this. We're going to add another dimension, or maybe more than one additional dimension, to the concept of limitations within Kedusha. In other words, we have the limitation of the Jordan, of the Yarden, which represents the dimension of transferring from Kalipa into Kedusha. We have the dimension of the Kinneret, which is the guard, which preserves that when the Jordan is transferring from one domain into the other, it's from Kalipa into Kedusha, not God forbid the other way around. We're going to have several more dimensions of godliness being manifest in creation, and in each case, it corresponds to the criteria, to the concept of Veyarad Hagvul. But I want to tell you some stories. And to be very direct, I don't need to tell you these stories. I want to tell you these stories. And I'm telling these stories because I wish to offer some illustration to why limit is actually favorable. Something which has no limit is not a constructive thing. I don't know how many times I've already shared with you the Maamar Chazal, Yetze tineg ve'isha la'olam yehei smel doicha v'yamin makareves, which means to say that in all very intense emotional relationships, with temptation, with a wife, and with children, the first requirement is limits, which seems counterintuitive. If you love somebody so much, you want to give. Torah says first set borders. And the Torah is right. It's incredibly wise. Because if you don't set limits on powerful emotional relationships, they will burn themselves up. They cannot be sustained. The limitations don't limit relationships. They preserve them. In other words, a relationship between a husband and wife is the most powerful relationship in the world. The laws of Taras HaMashpacha, mutual respect, allow those relationships to endure. And the same is in our children. You want a healthy relationship with your children, you must set limits. Loving your children unconditionally and without any constraints is going to destroy you and ultimately be terrible for them. And obviously that's true when it comes to temptation. Lust, Torah doesn't say don't have anything that you desire, but Torah does say that if you just permit yourself whatever indulgence, it'll destroy you. So the reality is that the limitations become the very basis of a constructive purpose and direction. So let me share some ideas with you. The Baal Shem Tov was visited by a childless couple, and they wanted the Baal Shem Tov to pray for them to have a child, which the Baal Shem Tov did, and they had a child. So a voice came out of the heaven and announced that the Baal Shem Tov had forfeited his Olam Haba because this couple was destined to be childless, as was decreed upon high. And the Baal Shem Tov, so to speak, forced the hand of the heavens to give this meant-to-be childless couple a child. So, of course, the story goes that the Baal Shem Tov heard this voice announce that because he had interfered with the heavenly plan, he's forfeited his Olam Haba, and he danced, saying, now I'm going to serve God just for the sake of serving him. So, as the story goes, he was punished and given back his Olam Haba. Tzaddikim perform miracles all the time. We know of Tzaddikim's capacity, kvayachol, to master Darkei Teva, the nature of God's world, which, of course, God has bestowed that power upon them. But there's limits. There's a story with the Rebbe. In 1952, the very famous Fabrengen, where the Rebbe gave a family, bracha, that relatives of theirs in the Soviet Union should leave Russia. So somebody else ran over to the Rebbe and said, my brother's also in Russia and I want a bracha. And the Rebbe pounded on the table and he said, Medav Zogen offen, I'll say it straight, You can't give any person, every person, every bracha, as hatztan b'cheresh hanshama, as do with the neshama. It's not always possible for the Rebbe to give any person any bracha. In fact, a fellow that I know, an acquaintance of mine, told me a most interesting story where his family lived in Europe. He came to learn here in the 60s, and his mother had asked him to ask the Rebbe for a bracha that her relatives leave Russia. And she asked once, and he asked once, and he asked twice. Of course, each request was separated by a year. He would go into Yechidus, and the Rebbe wouldn't respond. And after several years, 2 or 3 or 4, he said to himself, the Rebbe's not responding. Why burden the Rebbe with this? It's going to give the Rebbe agmas nefesh. And he stopped asking. Several years later, his father called him and said to him, please mention my family's names to the Rebbe in Yechidus. There's an opportunity. They may be able to leave the Soviet Union. They could use a bracha. So he put their name into the Rebbe. The Rebbe read their name and looked up and said to him, you always ask about your mother's family. What were their names? So he recited the names of the members of his mother's family, and they came out of Russia. Now, explain the story any way you wish. You're talking about a tzaddik, and koyach eliki, godly blessings that can help people in the material world, and yet there's apparently some kind of order and some kind of limitation. There's a famous Maharal, which Chassidus frequently quotes, that B'darkei hanisim yesh seder. There's laws to the realm of miracles, different laws, but laws nevertheless. Because without limitations, you have chaos, you have disorder. The flip side of this is a very cute story. A chassid came to the Tzemach Tzedek, to the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, and asked him for a bracha for children. So the Tzemach Tzedek sent him to the Veledniker, Rabbi Sol Velednik, who was a very famous Chassidic Rebbe. The Rebbe mentioned him in a number of sichos. He's also well represented in the Rebbe's diary, in conversations that the Rebbe had with the previous Rebbe. He was a contemporary of the Tzemach Tzedek, an incredible Baruch HaKodesh. I mean, he knew everything. And a great Balmoifis. He performed many miracles. So this Chassid comes to the Tzemach Tzedek, who was his Rebbe, asking for a bracha for children. The Tzemach Tzedek sends him off to the Veledniker. So he goes to the Veledniker, gets a bracha, and has a child. So he comes back to the Tzemach Tzedek and says, Rebbe, if you knew that the Veledniker could give me a bracha, the Veledniker Rebbe, the Yisrael of Velednik, and I should have a child, then you probably could have given me the bracha yourself. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, you were not supposed to have any children. And I knew it. So I couldn't give you the bracha. The Velednik is a tzaddik, but he doesn't know the score. He simply doesn't know. So he could give you a violating bracha, if you will, where I cannot. In other words, the Tzemach Tzedek says, I was contained by additional knowledge. He didn't have that additional knowledge. And as a result, he was able to give you a bracha, violate laws, because he wasn't violating any laws. He was simply a holy man giving a blessing. So there's different rules for different tzaddikim, apparently. But on a certain level, a tzaddik knows not just the limitations of this world, the limitations of on high. And it seems like a negative thing. Certainly if you need a bracha and you cannot get it. The Rebbe once told somebody, someone was persisting. There was a bad situation. And the Rebbe said, what do you think? You have the miracle in my pocket. If I had it in my pocket, I'd take it out and hand it to you. But ultimately those limitations are the basis for an orderly governance of Hashem's world. And even the tzaddik, who kvayachal has koyches to alter nature, is contained, is limited to some degree and on some level and in some way by these limitations. Now a powerful and painful story, which I'm going to share with you, notwithstanding that it's powerful and painful. Reb Aaron HaGodel Mikarlin, the first stolen Karliner Rebbe. He was the Rebbe of Reb Shlomo Karliner, who was his successor, and the father of Reb Asher Karliner, who was his successor. Passed away very young. Passed away, I think, Tovkuf Lamed Beis. That means 1772. A little bit less than a year, if I'm not wrong, before the Message of Maggid, before the Holy Maggid. He was a very, very big tzaddik, incredibly holy man, very connected to the Holy Maggid. On his last trip to Mezrich, he came to the Rebbe, to the Holy Maggid, spent some time, I don't know how long it was, probably several months. and he went in to say goodbye. In Yiddish it's called Gein Zegenezach, to say goodbye. He came into the Maggid, and the Maggid wished him well and sent him off. As soon as this person left the Maggid's room, the Maggid called in some of the boys, some of the other Talmidei Maggid, who were all giants, and said, see to it that Rabbi Aaron HaGadol should not leave the city of Mezrich. Don't let him leave. But of course, don't tell him I said. So they did that. They worked him over. And, they're pretty convincing folk. And they talked and they talked and they said, how could you leave? You know what kind of incredible revelations are going to happen over the next few days and weeks. You got to stick around. And they put doubt into his decision to leave. So what did he do? He went back into the Maggid and again said, I apologize, but I've been given a lot of pressure to stick around. Is there any reason for me to stay or should I leave? He says, no, focus on today, have a pleasant trip. And he blessed him again on his journey. As soon as he left the Maggid's room, the Maggid called in the Chevra and said, don't let him leave. They worked him over a second time. And again he went into the Maggid, and again the Maggid sent him off, and they worked him over a third time. And the way I heard the story, he didn't stay, he left. And he passed away, never came again. When the news reached Mezrich that Rabbi Aaron HaGadol had passed away, his friends were stunned. And they were shaken, obviously. He was a very young man. And they went into the Maggid and they said, I'm going to speak to you in English. I'm sure they said it with great respect, but what kind of game is this? If you have a man's life in your hand, why are you playing around? And the reality was, the Maggid would not tell him directly to stay. He could have. He had them pressure him to stay, and they didn't succeed. So the Maggid explained to the Talmidei Maggid that it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, and there's a Maimon Alter Rebbe, by the way, I think in Anochas Harap, which makes this point. B'chol beis hinei manhu. There are certain tzaddikim that God trusts, and they know absolutely everything. They knew all the secrets that are going on in Laila, but they're not allowed to reveal. In other words, the Maggid knew what was going to happen to Rabbi Aaron HaGadol, but he also knew that the form, the medium through which he knew did not allow him to share it. So he tried. Now, this is a mind-boggling story if you think about it. I tell people this story and then I say to them, have you ever thought about being a Rebbe? Think again. Let somebody else have that job. The Rebbe Rashab as a child used to say, Ich will nicht sein kein Yebbe. I don't want to be a Yebbe, a Rebbe. A Yebbe is ein Chasidim sein Asach. A Yebbe is one, Chasidim are many. It's not fun to have this much information. A normal person has this much information would go absolutely crazy. How do you have this much information? And not only do you not share it, you don't even indicate that you have it. It's part of the role of a tzaddik. The point of all this is that limitation is built into the design of creation. And it's not the necessary evil. It's not the negative thing. It's the foundation of reality. No limits, no reality. This is true on the very definition of a world. And it's also true in as much of that purpose is concerned. And therefore, when the Torah describes the holy land, it says, Veyarad Hagvul, the limitation was manifest. No manifest limitation, no Israel, no Yiddishkeit, no reality, and certainly no purpose. And that's what our mind has been exploring. Yud Beis Gevuli Alachs. And I can assure you that my list of stories is quite long, but at least in the short term, I'm going to approach the Maimon. Perhaps there'll be opportunity later on in the class to sprinkle in another story here or there, but the limitations are the basis for the reality. Yud Beis Gevuli Alachs, and I did that there's borders. And that the various different dimensions interact with other dimensions. They complement and contain one another. Is not just the basis for limitation, but that this limitation is the basis for reality. And of course, the number that this Maimon revolves around is the number 12. And Kabbalistically, it has to do with the 12 relationships between the dimensions. We talked about this last week in a considerable amount of detail. It's essentially 4, and how in each one of the 4 you have 3. There's 4 sides, and each one has 3. The Beis Boker, you'll see momentarily, there's 12 cattle that support the divine chariot. This is one of the many, many mystical allusions to the divine chariot, and the reason there are 12 cattle is there's 4 sides, east, west, north, and south, and each one has 3 cattle. How you understand the number 12 as being limited has various forms. I mean, the discussion we had last week is that 12 is 2 times 6. 6 are core emotions, they're not interactive, and therefore they exist only in theory. And when you balance each one out with its counterpart, reality emerges from that complementing one another and containing one another. But the key word in the Maamar, or the key number in the Maamar, is the number 12. We're going to have a variety of further examples for the number 12, and we're also going to have a variety of different levels. The argument is going to be that throughout creation, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, one of the forms that denotes the limitation of reality, which means, in other words, that creates that reality, is the number 12. Let me just mention that, of course, above 12 is 13. And very conveniently, 13 is Begematria Echad, which means 1. And the mysticism would say that 12 represents limit, and the additional 1 creates unity within that limit. Or to say it in fancier words, infusing infinity within the finity. Not destroying the infinity, but somehow creating a possibility for the fusing of opposites, which is the purpose of creation, to bring God into the limitation, and limitation should continue to be. In other words, to bring God into a world which continues to be a world, a vessel to receive the godliness. So let's get to the text. Let's start. And I owe you some stories. If I don't get to them tonight, you can email the administration and complain, but that's life. Line 77. The notion of limitation, which is being represented in our discourse by the number 12, which corresponds to the relationship between the various dimensions that create not just the reality of space, but the limitation of space. Exist in the lower worlds as well. They descend into Malchus of each of the 3 worlds, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. You see, a world is not Esesfiris. A world is called Echolos and Levushim. Just like a person is not a brain. A person has arms and legs and a torso and heart and lungs and kidneys and spleen and intestines and all the rest. So, just like in a person, the first thing that develops in the fetus is the most important part of the person, either the heart or the brain or the heart. And from that radiates all the secondary and tertiary aspects of the person. The same is true of a world. The world has a center, the godly aspect of the world, the Beis HaMikdash, the Kedesh HaKadoshim, the 10 Sefirot. From the godly aspect of a new world, say Bria, will radiate the world of Bria. So Malchus of Bria becomes the meeting point between the center of a world, between the brain of a world, and the world at large. So you have the number 12 in Malchus of each of the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, which means to say that the center of each world, which is godliness, is going to radiate limitation to the world which is going to develop around itself. Just like a fetus begins with a heart and a brain, and then develops a body around itself that's limited and diversified, one head and not 2, 2 eyes and not 3, chas v'sholom. And all those limitations are a favorable thing. Malchus, not only of Atzilus, but of the lower worlds, also has hidden within itself the number 12, which is the basis of what's going to be manifest in creating real limitation in the world, in the body, which will be mitrakem, which will envelop the center, which is the brain of the heart, the godliness of the world. Ubebriya, and as it manifests in the world of Bria, Hein Bechinas, this is the category of Yud, Bechinas, Yud Beis, Bakar, the 12 cattle. In Kabbalah, there's all kinds of metaphor, and of course, it deserves time, and we don't have it. But the 12 cattle represent, like the animals of the divine chariot, they hold up the divine throne, 3 to the east, 3 to the west, and so forth. The Shleisha Poinim Negba V'chol, 3 are facing the south, and so forth. And then it says, V'hayom Oymed Alehem Milmaila. And above the 12 cattle, there's a platform. And above the platform, there's godliness. In this case, the godliness is represented by the word Yam. Yam means a sea. What is a sea? A place where everything gathers, everything is collected, it's unified. And as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, metaphysically, the Yam in this context represents the 13, the Echad, which is above the 12, and actually creates unity. Again, to be fancy about it, brings the infinity into the finity. V'hayam, and this notion of the sea, which is the 13th aspect, the godly aspect, hu inyan malchus datzilas, is the godliness which is the source of, but above the world. And it is in the world where you have the full concept of limitation, as represented by the number 12. But in malchus, in the sea, which is the godliness which is above the limitation, you don't have limit yet. Ki malchus hi hadibur, because the realm of malchus represents speech. Now, usually when you talk about speech, you talk about limitation, right? Not now. Here we're going to speak about the infinite aspect of speech. And what is that? V'tzirufei oisies hadibur. Speech has various aspects. One of them is the pronunciation of sounds. Another one of them is the communication of thoughts. And the third of them is the arrangement of words. According to Torah, the miracle of speech is not that you can make sounds. It's not that you can make a series of sounds in an orderly fashion, producing syllables. But it's that you can say the same idea using many different words. Or you can use the same words and you can reconstruct them. This is called tziruf, mixing and matching. And according to Chassidishe and Kabbalah, the capacity to mix and match letters and words, to say the same thing in various different ways, or to use the same form to say various different things, comes from a very high level. It says the capacity and the passiveness with which people juggle words and don't even pay attention to how flexible and how plastic words are to them comes from a level which is higher than reason altogether. V'zeh nikra yam. This dimension is called the sea. It's a collection. It's a unity. So if 12 represents limit, above the 12, above the limit, there's the 1, which represents the Ein Sof, and in context this is Malchus. It says the Maimer u'bechinas Malchus hi klalusa. So Malchus, which is, so to speak, the end of the center of the world, the end of the godliness of the world, the heart and the brain, which is going to radiate limitation to the world around itself, encapsulates, has within itself all the limit that's later going to manifest, hamashpas b'hem, which is later going to flow into them. Therefore it stands in the center. Lashpiya lakulam, to give sustenance to all the different dimensions and relationships between dimensions which actually create the space and limitations of space of the reality of a world. And this is represented by a pasuk. V'samti choil gavul hayam. God Almighty says, I'm going to make sand the border of the sea. So the word choil means sand, but the word choil also means ordinary. And in this case, it's a very, very useful pun, because choil in this case means ordinary, as opposed to kodesh. So choil, ordinary, worldliness, is the border layam to godliness. Yud beis bakar anan l'kroi b'shem choil. The 12 cattle are the notion of choil, of what is ordinary, sand. They represent the limitations for lebechinas yamanal, for the sea, for the infinity. Al derech, similar to shakein lemagbil, the vessels limit the light. So there's two aspects here. A, they represent the notion of limitation. B, through them, the yam, the godly aspect, becomes limited and is eventually manifest. But I guess in context, it's useful to call the yam echad, number 13. The same is true on the borders of the Holy Land. And it says in Yecheskel, when Mashiach is going to come, that Israel is going to be divided into 13 sections. Shisha gvulim mikan, v'shisha mikan. 6 on one side and 6 on the opposite side. V'atruma be'emtza isam v'chuli. And the choicest one, which is probably Shevet Levi's border, to be candid, I didn't look up the pasuk in Yecheskel, I meant to and I forgot, is in the center. So you have two concepts here. The reality of a world represented by 12, which is limit, and its godly source. And that ultimately the limit radiates from the godly source. And the intent and purpose and end is that you should bring the godliness into the limited world and expose how even the godliness is functional and can be real in a world by itself being affected by limit. Vihine. So, there's limitation in Atzilus. There's a limitation in each of the 3 worlds, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. Malchus of those worlds, the heart of those worlds, is the Yam, which is the epicenter and source of the 12, of the actual manifestation of limitation, and he continues now to talk about the physical universe. The Yud Beis Mazal Shabarakia, there are 12 constellations, the 12 signs of the zodiac, which, without getting into the theological question of credibility and the rest, Al Pi Torah have reality. The source of the 12 signs, the reason the signs go in the number 12 is because on high they are all represented by the number 12. In other words, the source of the 12 signs of the zodiac, the fact that the heavens are divided up into 12 equal parts, is a symptom of the fact that limitation mystically and philosophically is represented by the number 12 as discussed. V'zehu, and this description, that you have limitation in Atzilus, limitation in Bria, Tzir, and Asiya, and limitation in Asiya, Gashmis, is the idea of Gavaya Me'al Gavaya, that the realms are parallel, higher and higher and higher still. Each realm is a mirror to some degree of the world above itself, and is mirrored by the world beneath itself. And of course, higher than high is Shaimer, is an additionally world also conformed to the same basic design. In other words, each world gets life and is a chain reaction evolution from the world above itself. Until the notion of limitation represented by 12 in the highest of the created worlds, which is Bria, Malchus, that's sustained by the heart, so to speak, Malchus of Atzilus. That Malchus of Atzilus is the heart and the godly source of all of the limitations of all the worlds that are going to follow. That's all. So, godliness has the potential for limitation, and that's the basis for the actualization of limitation as represented by the number 12. And in the language of our Maamar Veyarad Hagvul, you want a reality, you need limit. V'noida continues the Rebbe, says, we also know the Gama Nefesh HaBahamis, Shimi Klipas Neiga, the animal soul that comes from Klipa. I'm line 85, by the way. Sharsha Gam came and also comes from the 12 cattle, from the design of the Merkava of the higher worlds, as represented by the number 12. Shehem, that the source of the animal soul in the mystical realms is represented by the animals of the divine chariot. Bechinas Pnei Yadi, the face of the lion, Pnei Shai, the face of the ox, V'chulu. And of course you have the face of the eagle, the face of the man. And Rak, the issue is only Shehid, that the actual Nefesh HaBahamis of a person, which is also represented by the limitation associated with the number 12, comes from on high, but here the fall is precipitous, is incredible. Shema B'chinas Hapselis is from the waste, the residue, the fallout, Shalei Nevada, which has yet to be corrected and clarified. Mashenken HaMerkava, as opposed to the way this concept of limitation, as represented by the number 12, exists in the chariot upon high, it's after the clarification. So you have 12 in Atzilus, 12 in Bria Tzir Asiya, 12 in the Kia in the heavens, and 12 in the animals down here, in the animal soul of a person. All of them follow the same pattern, come from the same root, fundamentally, basically, and have the same idea. But the Rebbe goes on to say something about life, about people. Chassidus explains that when a person says the Shema, you preface it by saying long blessings. Alter Rebbe mentions in Tanya, I think Perik Memtes from Shas Tshuvas HaRashba, that there seems to be no logical connection between the substance of the blessings before the Shema and the Shema itself. Shema talks about accepting God, being dedicated to God, and accepting His mitzvahs and practicing His mitzvahs. What do the brachas of Shema talk about? Angels and souls. Now, you can obviously explain the need to discuss souls, but why angels? So the Rebbe explains why. And this is, of course, a classic idea in Chassidus. The first blessing of the Shema discussed at great length. Say that the design and order of the various levels of angels, that you have Srafim and you have Chayes, and of course the last one is Eifanim. Without getting into the details, Srafim, Chayes, and Eifanim is Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. All of these categories of angels, each in their own way and in their own form, is in acknowledgement and subservience to God. And we talk about the angels because the angels have a kinship with our animal souls. They're a reflection of the angels, and they conform to the similar model. In other words, the constant is the number 12. V'hu shayidei zeh, that by focusing on how angels interact with godliness, yoid and ha'ahava, we affect at the light of love. Should manifest gamal and nefesh abahamas of a person's animal soul. In other words, you're focusing on the animal soul source, because the animal soul source is a supernal animal, is an animal in a good way. What is the meaning of animal in context? Passion. And you want to harness the passions from on high to make the animal soul down here passionate about God Almighty. Which comes from there. And the idea is to arouse the heart of the animal soul, of the beast within the person. To be ripped away. From physical delights. Which we sometimes get immersed in. To be drawn to our own root, which means, in other words, to achieve a fusion, a reunification with not just our godly source in the number 12 on high, but in the echad, in the godliness itself, which is the number 13, as I'm teaching it to you. Is behind the supernal chariot. Other Maamar Chassidus address this point as well. So, the limitations of the animal soul come from the limitations of the supernal animal, or animals. And you want to rouse the passions of the animal soul by giving them an association to their source in the hope of de-animalizing them. As the famous story with the Malach and the Alter Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe was leaving and the Malach accompanied him, and he told the coachman to whip the horses. One version was whip the horses so the horses should know they're animals. And the other version was whip the horses so the animals should cease to be animals. The Alter Rebbe took this as, great mystical code, so very powerful different ways of serving God Almighty. But part of this is to get the animal to act like a mensch. The human being's animal should focus. And you do this by connecting the animal to its source, and it's always because of limitation. If the source of the physical animal was infinite, there's no connection, there's no influence, there's no parallel. Because the animal down here is limited, and the spiritual source of the animal is limited as well, they can access that source and transform themselves and raise themselves up. Line 91, that's the idea of limitation descending. You see limitation down here, it comes limitation on high. And there are many advantages to this. Most fundamentally is no limitation, no reality. And on the first level, on the lowest level, the limitation affects what we call Hayardeina, the River Jordan. Because the River Jordan represents the realm of Bidur. Good and evil are entangled. You want to take from Klippa, give to Kedusha. Says the Rebbe, the River Jordan represents the struggle in the realm of Klippa. Arizal interprets, based on this Maamar Chazal, that takes from one and gives the other. Pirush. The mysticism behind this, of course, is to ascend, to cause ascension. The 288 sparks that have collapsed and fallen into Klippa. To bring them back up, to achieve clarity and become included in holiness. Says the Rebbe, and of course the beginning of transference, transforming and transferring Klippa into Kedusha as our own animal souls, but then it has to radiate beyond our body to our possessions and to the world at large and so forth. And bringing clarity and elevation to all the foods we eat. And this is a love which comes from the world. In other words, by taking animalism and making them passionate about godliness, the world is coming to love God. And that's the concept of Veyarad Hagvul, Hayardeina. The Jordan's metaphysical representation is taking from Klippa and giving to Kedusha. This requires limitation in Kedusha, requires limitation in Klippa, and the meanings of thereof and so forth. Continues the Rebbe and he says, line 93, however, in order to effectively bring limitation into Yarden, which is the realm of a person's life, that's about taking from Klippa and give to Kedusha, has to be reinforced. She is bad at Klippa's nego to Kedusha, that Klippa should be affected in a clarifying way and become included in holiness. For this purpose, you need help from on high. The purpose of this help is that the limitation should work for you instead of against you. If this world, which is a world of entanglement of good and evil, is limited, and you want to change that, and raise up the negative aspects of this world and include them into Kedusha by not breaking out of the limitation, but working within that limitation to transform it. You need help from on high. Why? The Ilafkin, because if you don't have help from above, which we're going to call, by the way, the number 13, Echad, Yam, Ha'adarab, the opposite can occur as well. That Yuchali is conceivable, Chas v'shalom, God forbid, Behepech, the opposite, Sheyital me'akedusha, v'yitin v'choli, Klipa should take from Kedusha and put it into its own domain. You have to bring a higher limitation into the lower limitation of the Yarden. In other words, line 96, to bring forward from the so-called limitations of on high. The Midas al-Yenas, the beginning of them is the Midas of Atzilus. And it's going to be brought all the way down from the idea that even godliness needs a limit in godliness realms. Kayach zeh, this possibility. She is bar, it says to bring clarity into the 288 sparks that are entangled. As it is known, the primary effect of bringing clarity into the worlds, has to do with the number 6. And in this case, 6 times 2. And in context, this means, it goes into 6 days of the week. Because during the week, as it says in Mechilta de Rashbi, Chassidus always brings it, or Teyase, that it's a mitzvah to work during the week, just like it's a mitzvah to rest on Shabbos. And the work we do during the week is called Boider. That's why, of course, Chassidus brings that on Shabbos, Boider, Asar, and so forth. Elashem Klum, Zemizeka, now 6 doesn't work, because each one is pole, only when they interact. And the 6 becomes 12, does become a reality. Which is why each day as Yud Beis Shai says 12 hours, as does the night. This is the concept of Yeridas Hagvul Hayardena, to bring down the limitation into the river Jordan from on high, from above the Yarden, so that the Yarden should effectively, using its limitation, transform Klipa into Kedusha rather than have itself transformed. And in last week's class, and also tonight, you'll see it momentarily, this is called Veyarad Hagvul Yam Kineret. Above the Yarden, you have the Sea of Galilee, as we call it. It's a little lake. It's called a Yam because, like an ocean, it's a basin that holds water, although it holds much less water. And this represents godliness in its purest form. So the Yam Kineret limit imposes upon the Yarden's limit that in its struggle to transform Klipa and bring it to the Shus of Kedusha, Kedusha should win and Kedusha should not lose. And he continues and he adds another dimension, and that is the idea of Kriyas Yamsov. The sea was split when the Jews left Egypt, which is a precursor to the splitting of the river Jordan when the Jews went into the Holy Land. And he's going to argue that the Yam Suf is similar to the notion of Yam Kineret. It's the 13th, it's the godliness, which is the source of the limitation, and above the limitation, and connected to limitation to give the strength to guarantee that when Kedusha is clarifying and transforming and elevating Klipa, Kedusha should win and not Klipa Chas v'shalom. Apiza Yuvan Gamkin, this explains, Sheyuvan, we can explain. When the Jewish, they left the Holy Land, Hayakriyas Yamsov, the sea had to split. And then, of course, 40 years later, Me'ayard and the Jordan had to split. We've already mentioned before, that to effectively bring godliness into the limitation, you have to have a godly force which is above the limitation, called Yam. And of course, this Yam is Shubechinas, Malchus is the attribute of Malchus, which is the godly center, which is the source of the world which radiates from it. Yam Suf, and Malchus is specifically called the sea, that is the end, because it's safe for the Chodag, the last of the levels of the inner dimension, of the godly dimension of a world. The Yad, and the river Jordan represents the struggle with Klipa. Or Kriyas Yamsov, and by splitting the sea, you're bringing forward a koyach from the Yam to protect the Yadin. Transforms the sea into the land. What is naturally concealed, Nasabechinas Gil, should be revealed. Says the Rebbe, Zehu, this means mystically, that God Almighty should inspire the godly soul, that it should help the animal soul win and not lose. Shabachin is Madrigas Ayenis of the higher levels, line 102. Shabachin is Helam, which is hidden. Yom Shechubachinas Gil should be revealed. Ukamation is Baal, as we explained before, that Yam, that the sea, which represents Tziruf, who he has within itself the possibility of transcendence, even beyond reason. As we know, Shekriyas Yam Suf Nikra, the event and date in which the sea was split, is called and represents Lei, the sun Shabbos, the birth of souls, which is the emergence of new godliness into the lower world. What does it take to bring new godliness into the lower world? One word answer: limitation. Shu is Gabras, it's a strengthening. Vegiliyad Atzilus, and affecting a greater manifestation of Atzilus, light, Bibri in the lower world. So on the one hand, you're revealing infinity in the lower worlds, but the simple fact that you can reveal it in the lower worlds indicates that we're talking about something which has some kind of limitation. Which is very similar to the idea mentioned in the previous Maamar last week. In other words, Veyarad Hagvul Yam Kineret, Al Ketav Yam V'Gemer, that Yam Kineret in the Holy Land represents the same idea as Kiryas Yam Suf, the godliness which is the source of and above the limitation. And you reveal that source to preserve the effective use of the limitations represented by the number 12. Continues the Rebbe on line 104, and he adds, this explains why the sea split into 12 parts. Shahu, and the idea is to fuse and to bring forward that into the Yud Beis Gevulei Alachsen of a lower world should be manifested Yud Beis V'Alachsen Shabbat Tzilus. The godliness, the limitation of godliness in Atzilus should be brought forward, be it Beis Shvat of the 12 tribes, which should be V'Alachsen Shabbat B'Riyad, limitation in the second world. This is the notion that the number 12 of the Shvatim begins in Atzilus and descends lower. And in order to fuse the godly limitation as it is in godliness with the world, who batika taya, have to have a koyach which is higher than both. And this is the idea. You have the limitation of the yad, which represents the struggle of this world. The limitation of the yad, which represents the peace of this world. The capacity to bring this limitation and this limitation together comes from higher than both, and it preserves that when a person is involved in Avodas Habirurim, Kedusha should win and Kedusha shouldn't lose. And the Pasuk indicates this with the following words: V'zehu Veyarad Hagvul mikedem line. The source of limitation is mikedem line, which means above the eye, before the eye. Explains the Maamar, I mean seeing godliness, which is a very high level. Before the eye represents beyond any kind of concept of limitation, and it empowers that limitation be healthy. Therefore it's able to be a support. This is true also when the sea was split. That the power to split the sea was a game of wind that came from before Hishtalshel. Line 107. When the sea was split, God was revealed to souls. As I afterwards, then you have to bring clarity into klipa, which is through the nefesh habahamis of the yid, his habchos nefesh habahamis, which involved the transformation of the animal soul of the yid. It requires that the river Jordan must be split as well to bring a koyach from Yam into Yarden. V'Yisrael of the Jewish nation traverses it as it is in a dried state. So you have the limitations of the world, which create a struggle. What guarantees, what secures that the struggle should come out the way it's supposed to, is that the limitation within godliness, which is manifest. But there are two more ideas of limitation as it brings into the world. But the two additional ideas don't only deal with the reality and with the godliness of the reality, but the godliness of the religion, Torah mitzvahs. The first idea, if I understand it correctly, is what's familiar to the Derashviniks, to the experts at peripheral and superficial Chassidus, of which I am a master, what we call Hagbola Atzmis. Mitzvahs are limited. Tefillin has a certain size, certain requirement. It's not allowed to have more. But those limitations are not real limits. It's the condensing of godliness. Right? Al Rebbe says in Tanya, anytime a Jew does any mitzvah, he's holding atzmos. Now we know Leis Machshavot Tisa Beklai, you can't hold atzmos. How you have atzmos when you do a mitzvah? And of course the answer is because the atzmos in a mitzvah has been encapsulated in a limitation. That's a higher concept of a Yarad Hagvul. Not only the limitation which allows the world to exist and the world to be successfully given clarity and so forth, but now we're talking about bringing the godliness into the world, which is truly infinite. Here too, You have to contain the godliness in packages, in bite-sized portions, if you will, so that the godliness can have a connection to this world. Otherwise, all the godliness of all God has no effect on the world if they don't meet. So we're going to do 109. And again, you'll see later on in Mitzshem on line 136 another interpretation, another dimension to what it means for godliness to be manifest in the world. There has to be limit. The limitation is not the deficiency, it's a reality, and it serves very positive purposes. So the first concept of the containment of limitation we're now going to explore is what we call the Hagbola Atmas of Mitzvah. And by the way, we're learning Yigeres HaTshuva and Chitas. And recently, the last couple of days, weeks, we had the concept of a Yipach, that all creation are created through speech, while Jewish souls are created through blowing. And of course, the argument is when one blows, man the nafach, meteche nafach, there's a gavura, there's an inner strength that comes forth when one blows. But at the same time, although Neshama Yisrael vayipach, the vayipach of the Shama Yisrael is contained within a body. Because if the vayipach of the Shama Yisrael was not contained within a body, it wouldn't exist in this world. In other words, the gavura that Hashem employs to bring forward souls from a godly realm into this limited realm doesn't only have a power, but it means that there's a limitation in the neshama so that it could exist in the lower worlds. So we do limited mitzvahs. Those limitations don't limit, they encapsulate infinity so that the infinity can even exist in this world. So let's read. There's another means by which we can interpret the concept of limitation vis-a-vis creation, in addition to the limitation in birur and the limitation in what protects the birur. As Chassidus explains in another context, the positive is that all of your borders are going to become stones of desire. Now, stones are stones. That's all they are. Stones of desire means precious stones. The limitations now doesn't mean limitations of the world, or the limitations of Malchut, which is the source of the world. It means limitations of Teda, which is Chachma, Vatzilus. V'hi Teda, which is the Teda. Says the Rabbi, you should know, Shehi Gavu, Leis Chachma, Sayyid Barach. The Teda has limits. The borders of the Teda make the Teda a Teda. If the Teda were infinite, without any borders, the Teda would not exist. And the infinite Teda that's packaged with its own limitations descends into the physical world. All of Yiddishkeit conforms to measures and to limitations. If you didn't have limitations, if you could put infinity into its film, you could never wear its film. When one recognizes the limitations within godliness and brings them forward, b'mides, that are the human emotions, godliness should be contained. Yom shachli, what happens is that avnei, ordinary stones, in other words, physical things in the physical world, chayfet, become objects of desire. Shagam leiva, even the heart of stone, which is a negative thing, through the struggles in this lifetime, with the preservation that comes from Yam Kineret and Yam Suf, and now from the Lamed Beis Nasiv is Chochma, which means Yiddishkeit, Tia Chafetz, Avashekei, Kol Davka Beis Baravachul, should be longing and thirsty to become attached to Hashem. So we are now arguing that there's not a limitations in the world, and the source of the world, namely Malchus, there's limitations in Torah. Vatam, and the explanation, why the 32 pathways of Chochmah conjure up, or meant to conjure up, a concept of limitation. The reason we call them limited, even though Chochmah is infinity, is very simple. Because it says in Kabbalah's Sfarim, the 32 passageways of Chochmah. Represented 32 times the Torah has the word Elikim, the divine name, which means judgment and containment, before the word Havaya ever appears, and the Lamed Beis Nasiv is Chochmah, as lofty as they are the beginning of that limitation. Then godliness, as represented by the word Elikim, usually means limit. But in this case, it means condensation, to crunch infinite godliness into a contained way, but it's still infinite and godly. There's a need for various tzimtzumim. Until life can manifest in this world. Moreover, not just to bring godliness into the world, you need limitations. You need limitations in creating the world. It also has to do with strength and contraction. From the so-called concept of the divine hair, which hair is a little thin tube. A little bit of life flows through the hair that represents the tzimtzum to the lower realms. Even chokhmah, which means teid and mitzvah, which is truly infinite, is also called gvul. Because it goes through the containments and limitations of the 32 times. The divine name of Elikim appears in the Chumash before the Shem Havaya is ever written. At the beginning of these limitations are a higher limitation of the Kav. Line 117. And he spells it out. Another form for the same is brought in other Maimorim. And what he's going to say is that through the containment of mitzvahs, which, as I'm explaining it to you, are Hagbola Atzmis. They're limited, yet they carry the whole essence, which means they're only limited in their form, but not limited in their substance. You bring infinity of godliness into the world. And here's how he says it. There is a discussion in Chassidus, the notion that I, which is an allusion to God, fill heaven and earth. But the word I in this pasuk is understood to mean the God himself. There's two psukim. Es hashamayim ves haaretz ani molei versus molei kol haaretz kavoidei. There are two differences between those two psukim. One pasuk mentions both heaven and earth, while the second mentions only earth. One pasuk refers to God as ani, I, and the second pasuk refers to God as kavod, his honor, glory. And of course the idea is molei kol haaretz kavoidei is a much lower level. Ani goes on Atzmos, Hashem himself, to which heaven and earth are the same. So, in this passage, I fill heaven and earth, I goes on Hashem himself. So to reveal Hashem himself means to reveal the essence of godliness. Hashem himself, that's called Ani. Says the Rebbe, how can you bring down Hashem himself into a limited physical world? And the answer is, you have a lower level first. And the lower level is that the earth is filled with the glory of God. Now, kavod, conveniently, and of course in Kabbalah there's no convenience, it's precise, has the numerical equivalent of 32. Chaf and Beis and Vav and Dalet. Chaf is 20, Beis and Vav is 8, and Dalet is 4. It's 12. 12 and 20 is 32. So the 32 pathways of Chochmah, which represent the Hagbola Atzmis of Yiddishkeit, godliness as contained within limitation, becomes the basis for revealing godliness in the world. The word kavod, which is the numerical equivalent of 32, is going on the Torah and mitzvahs. Kavod, that kavod is numerically equivalent to 32. Which are the 32 passageways of Chochmah. Torah, which is the wisdom but containment of the Torah, so that Torah could come into this world. Says the Rebbe, and through this, it's conceivable that you can bring forward that God himself be revealed in this world, through the medium, through the intermediacy of the letters of the Torah and the containment of mitzvahs, because this limitation can be a vehicle through which infinity can be revealed. And that's the message of this Maamar Veyarad Hagvul. Even in godliness, you need limitation to make it real. Moving thus, though it appears that the 32 passageways of Chochmah represent limit, which are the limitations of the wisdom of God and his mitzvahs, which is manifest in the shiurim, the measurements of Torah, still, and perhaps precisely because of this, you have manifest in them and through them infinity, God himself. Skip the parenthesis. That's the point here. That when you say Bepirish Veyarad Hagvul, and in version 1, Veyarad Hagvul means the limitation of the struggle of life between good and evil. And only when you have the limitation could you engage with evil and defeat it. and you need a higher Gavul, Veyarad Hagvul Yam Kineret, to preserve that struggle, well, guess what? There's another dimension. And the other dimension is there's no struggle at all. We're dealing with godliness, what's called Ava B'Tanugim. Everything's glorious and lofty and pure and perfect. If it's not limited, you can't bring it down. V'asa Shapa Lashon V'Yara, then the word descend is most appropriate. Because we're talking about something very lofty but limited. Is Yardu V'Nishmel Lamata, has descended and lowered itself down here. B'Dvorim Gashmim, physical things. Peya, Bikurim, Trumas, Maises, all mitzvahs, all physical, all limited. And it has a distinct attachedness to the concept of limitations, borders, to the Holy Land. How does holy and border go together? The answer is, if border did not meet holy, neither would exist. And in reality, most mitzvahs are limited to the Holy Land. Continues the Rabbi, and he says, Moshe Rabbeinu was desperate to go into the Holy Land. He wanted to touch God. How do you touch God? By doing mitzvahs. How is doing mitzvahs touching God? Because it's atzmos encapsulated. It's the essence of godliness in a containment. And through it, infinity can be manifest. His interest was doing the mitzvahs. Moreover, the 32 containments within the Torah are the source of and descend to the 32 containments of Malchus, which is the source of the limitations of the world. So you have, two parallel realities. The reality of Torah, the reality of the world, both are limited but in very different ways. The world is actually limited. The Torah is infinity encapsulated. And that limit is the source for the second limit. It's also 32, which is the idea of to bring down the glory of Avaya Shia Malchus, to bring from the Torah into the creation, from the limitation that exists in Torah, which is a Hagbola Atzmis, into the limitation of the world, which is actual Hagbola, and to reveal infinity and the infinity of the world. Malchus is called Eretz Yisrael. Lakein Shayach Shape V'Yarad Hagvul Gabing Vos Eretz Yisrael. It's therefore most appropriate to refer to the borders of the Holy Land as being limited and contained. I apologize for being short on time, but there's a beautiful discussion called Asara HaKaf. That there's a parallel between the 10 utterances of creation and the 10 commandments. In fact, there are some people who show each one of the 10 utterances of creation mirrors one of the 10 commandments, and that's Hadibris. Limit. This is real limit, and this is infinity encapsulated. One is the source for the next. Ultimately, you bring one into the next, and through the limitation, the infinity can be manifest. So he says, this is the idea of Yarad Hagvul. You need to bring forward limit, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. And the pasuk says, Mikedem la'ayin, which is higher than the eye, higher than the Madrei Gavriya. We explained the pasuk Mikedem la'ayin once. We're going to explain the pasuk Mikedem la'ayin again. And on the next page, we're going to explain Mikedem la'ayin in a third way. Higher than the Madrei Gavriya, the essence of godliness, the infinity of godliness. And if I may use my own words, what we know in Kabbalah as being the ma of Chochmah. But I think this is more connected to the next paragraph. But 129, please. The source of the limitation is Mikedem la'ayin, from higher than the Madrei of the eye. In other words, it's about the Madrega of the ear. Vision is the source of Nekudim. Nekudim is Kesed, Nekudim is Sag, Nekudim is Toihu. Re'iyah, which is higher than Havana. Which is the concept of Chochmah, alternatively called Chayim. The limitations of the Torah, which are lower than Ayin, lower than Sag, lower than Toihu. They may be lower because they're limited, but they have a higher source because they can come down. It is true that it comes from wisdom, and wisdom is limited and lower than Elam Ateu. Says the Rebbe, it comes, it radiates through Chochmah, line 131. In other words, it appears to manifest from Chochmah because of its limitations. To be sure, Sharsha, the source of the limitations of Torah, is higher than Chochmah and even higher than Re'iyah. Kitayag, mitzvahs deraisa, the 613 mitzvahs, mitzvahs that Rabbanan add to them the 7 rabbinic commandments. 7 plus 613 in most cases. Heim Tarach is 620, which is the same letters as the word Kesed. Amud, the Ersha Bekesed, the pillars light and Kesed, or the beams of light and Kesed, you have to say that this means Pnimius HaKesed, because Chitzenius HaKesed is Ayin. So, limitation is less than the level of vision, but its source is higher. Mikedem La'ayin. This godliness, which is the source of what's going to become the limitation or the containment of the infinity within a capsule, which brings godliness into the limited world, is even higher than the infinity of Elam HaTayv, than the eyes of Elam HaTayv. It brings forward and fuses infinity into the containment of limitation. Through the limitations of the Torah. You bring down God Himself, the true infinity of God that's contained within those limitations. The famous quote from the Baditcher that Rebbe mentioned once, that the Baditcher Rebbe saw the Tanya, and he was incredibly moved. And he observed, I don't know how he managed to crunch the great God into a small formatted book. Now, it's an allegory, but there's a point. The Tanya holds the essence of godliness. Mitzvahs hold the essence of godliness. And through them, that essence is ultimately revealed. Which is the same notion of Veyarad Hagvul. But in the earlier version of the Maamar, the Gavul was about the struggle between good and evil that needs to be won. Now the Gavul is about bringing godliness into the world through the Hagvul Atzmas of mitzvahs. But there's a third interpretation. And the third interpretation is the idea of Ahava B'Tanugim. The idea that it's possible for a person to love God and not want God, but actually have the infinity of God. How do I bring godliness into the world? Through Torah mitzvahs. Can you bring godliness into the world through loving God? So the Alter Rebbe in Tanya chapter 40 says, bringing godliness into the world through loving God is like a person standing next to an ocean and screaming, I'm thirsty, and not bending down to drink. Because if you love God, you want God. You have God in mitzvahs. Can there be the acquisition, the having of God without doing the mitzvahs? And the answer is yes. Ahava B'Tanugim. Ahava B'Tanugim means a love that doesn't desire God but actually experiences godliness. And I don't want to go into this, but there is a Kuntas Chanin where the Alter Rebbe quotes a Zohar that proposes that when a person loves Hashem on a level of B'chol Meidech, on a level of Mesiras Nefesh, they're not lacking mitzvahs ma'asiyos. And this becomes the last model for infinity being contained with infinity, that a human being in the physical world can experience Ahava B'Tanugim, an infinite love for God. So within the finite person, you have this infinite love. A further example of infinity contained within Gavul, but not the Hagbola Atzmas of mitzvahs, but if you will, the Hagbola Atzmas of a human being experiencing Ahava B'Tanugim, experiencing godliness. And I want to offer another commentary. The level of vision is a very high level. It's classically in the Madrega of Kesed. Sag, as I told you before. Toihu. Einecha yoinim. I don't want to get into it, even though I should. It's a wonderful concept. It says in Kisvei Arizal, here I go, yeah? It says in Kisvei Arizal that there are birds that are mizdavgim, that mate by staring at each other. The eye contact affects the biological transmission necessary for reproduction. Now, explain this on a physical level how you will, but there's a mystical idea, a meeting of two souls, simply by the use of the eyes. Now, Kabbalah would associate that with angels, not with human souls. Human souls are on the one hand lower, on the other hand higher. It's called Yichud Gufni as opposed to Yichud Neshikin. So souls meet for the purpose of reproduction on a much more physical level, but what they create is really original and really new as opposed to angels whose meeting is through eye contact. So ayin, the eye, a very high level, but ultimately it's not the highest level. It's the periphery of Chokhmah. It's the outer level of Sag. Lamed Beis Nesive is the limitation of the 32 passageways of Chokhmah, which is lower than the level of the eye and the mating through eye contact. But brings down a higher level of Chokhmah. And for the Kabbalists keeping score at home, what could be higher than Ri of Chochmah? Ma of Chochmah, the bittel of Chochmah, which is the Atmos of Chochmah, which is even higher than the Madrega of Ayin. Regarding this, it is written the Sivli Yadoi Ayat, the passageway which nobody knows, not even the Ayat, no one has ever seen it. Again, no time for long speeches. There are 32 passageways of Chochmah. The highest of the 32 is called the Sivli Yadoi Ayat. It's the highest level and represents the deepest level of Chochmah. Now, the deepest level of Chochmah is defined by depth. Levels lower than it are defined by power, by greatness. So Chitzonius HaChochmah, or Chitzonius HaKesed, is ayin, is a connection through seeing. Higher than that is actually a connection through internalizing, being one with, alei ayin, higher than vision. And this is a place where limitation carries the essence of Hashem. The notion of gvul, of limitation being brought into the creation. Then slams against the border, the eastern border of the Sea of Galilee, of Kinneret. Shubachin is the concept of a love which involves delight. In other words, this means a person can experience the infinity of God through studying Torah. So now the limitation of Torah is not connected to doing physical mitzvahs that encapsulate atzmos, but that through Torah you have the delight of godliness, and the delight of godliness is the concept of experiencing infinity in this world. And this is the idea of Pesach. You open up your hand, and of course in Kabbalah it's Yudecha. You open up your Yuds. The letter Yud is a tiny little letter, represents Tzimtzum, and when you open up the Yud, infinity can manifest. And to give, to satiate each living thing with Ratzon, with his desire. This is probably Tzemach Tzedek's words, and usually they'd be in a parenthesis. In this particular moment, they're not. Consequently, through the Torah's limitations, which is the notion of bringing limitation from high to low. Through this limitation, you have a connection to infinity. Not an infinity in doing mitzvahs, as was discussed before, but an infinity in experiencing godliness in a madrega called Ava B'Tanug. One achieves an infinite love, which is mata kakines, sweet as a harp, which is the same as the word kinneret. A person experiences how God is his light, illuminated through a candle. In other words, the neshama itself is a candle, and candles are limited. A cup, fuel, and a wick. The soul is like a candle. But the light which burns on that candle is infinite. Through the study of Torah, which is limited. You have the light of Torah, which is infinite. In the finite candle will radiate, and v'nimshach will be brought forward, an infinite love. So this is another way of accessing infinity. Not the infinity of mitzvahs, but the infinity of godliness itself. Which is of course the madrega lam chatira, the madrega of the others, and so forth. Which is maso kakineka, now sweet as a harp. And after you bring the infinity of godliness through the vehicle of the limitation and containment of mitzvahs and Torah, down Veyarad Hagvul, then you descend even further, the limitation in the realm of struggling between good and evil. Which is klipa. Through the Torah. In addition to bringing the godliness into this world, you can transform klipa. The canal, Bepirish, as mentioned before, that you take v'chol gevulech la'avne, you start and go with limited stones and chayfetz. You make them desirable. Shagam leiv, the heart, the stone to yechafetza v'shekeka should long and thirst. L'davka b'yizbarach to become attached to the Eibishter. V'ayim b'pashas yisrei b'dach b'chedesh hashlishi me'in shenikras t'era eiv v'tashia achshav shenetenes keich nev shalakis u'matech nev shabaham b'zocholu. Do it on your own. Achine b'yemes, says the Rabbi, but to be sure. Shnei fanim, the two ways we interpret it, Sheve Pirush Veyarad Hagvul, bringing limitation forward. And of course the question becomes which two? Teir and Birurim or Teir and B'Tanugim? You figure it out. amount to the same thing. In other words, through Torah, which is on the face of it limited. Which is limited. You bring forward infinity, to supernal attributes which are beyond that limit. And of course the idea is through the infinity, through the finity, there is a world, and Yiddishkeit is a Metzius, and ultimately you're bringing the infinity of God into the finity of our world. A story, huh? Just one more story. The Alter Rebbe and the Bedichve made a chasana. And there was a city of Shlobim, a tiny little village. The shul was very small, the place was packed. And when they had to walk in, the room was so full they had to displace so many people. So the Bedichve says to the Alter Rebbe, he saw how uncomfortable it was for the guests that they entered last, as they should have. Mechitten, mekender gein durch en wand. Mechitten. We can walk through the wall. We can walk through the wall. So why displace people? Go around to the back of the shul, walk through the wall, you're right there's your seat, and so forth. So the Alter Rebbe said, Nicht als was me ken darf man weisen. Not everything you're capable of must you show. There's a limitation to the world. That's not a concealment of a godliness. It's the basis for its healthy function.